The Hells Angels are the most brutal motorcycle gang in the United States, originating in California in 1948. They are well known to be extremely violent and are involved with criminal activity. In today's video, we will discuss the most feared and dangerous Hells Angels members to exist and their historical contribution to the biker gang community in either positive or terrifying ways. Now remember, not all motorcycle clubs out there have an involvement in criminal activities, and many motorcyclists out there are just living their lives in a peaceful manner. But with that in mind, let's take a deeper look into the Hells Angels and their most dangerous and brutally horrifying members. Number 10. George Weston, a member of the Hells Angels Oakland group. He was a vice president of the Oakland Riders, and he worked his way up the ranks because of his friendship with Sonny Barger, the at the time president. Although he decided to terminate his membership in 1971, he still had close ties with many of the high-ranking members. But something odd happened with George one day as he opened the front door of his ranch home in Ukiah, California. He spotted 3 dead bodies just laying there. It is said that 3 members of the gang had wanted to go astray and start their own motorcycle gang, and as a result, the Hells Angels had spiked their coffees and murdered them. Police soon raided the ranch and found dozens of weapons, drugs, and dead bodies, and George and his wife were immediately arrested. The police department then continues to search the property for up to a week to see if any other criminal evidence could be found, as his ranch was the area where they suspected up to 12 missing bodies were buried. But in a turn of events, George made a plea deal with the authorities, became an official state witness. He promised as part of the deal to disclose the location of the missing bodies of all the Hells Angels murders in his ranch, and even went as far as testifying in court, ratting out the Hells Angels members that had committed the such murders. George's life drastically changed in 1972 when he was sharing a jail cell with his wife. One day, the pressure just got to him, and he decided to stake both of his eyes out with a pencil. Fortunately, his family and him were placed in the United States Witness Protection Program, and his current location is not known to this day. The only trace left of him is a book called A Wayward Angel, describing his time and life story as a Hells Angel member, and the dramatic U-turn he made to become an informant against them. Number 9. Alan Pizarro, another member of the Hells Angels. He was charged with murdering Meredith Curly Hunter Jr. at the Altamont Free Concert in 1969. A concert in which the Hells Angels were required to be security members for the Rolling Stones. Within hours, the members of the Hells Angels became drunk, and fights just started all over the concert. It was a pure scene of spectators versus Angels members, and the vibes just became too violent for any performers to even take the stage. Meredith climbed onto one of the loudspeakers and decided to pick a fight with an Angels member, and as a retaliation, the Angels repeatedly punched him and chased him back to the middle of the crowd. He was jumped and ridiculed. After all, it was a 5 versus 1 uneven fight. Meredith was ridiculed and retaliated with pulling a gun on the Hells Angels members. Pizarro then takes a weapon out of his jacket and stabs Meredith in the body 5 times, causing an instant death. Worse than anything else, Meredith's girlfriend was near the incident, and all she could do was helplessly watch. Pizarro was charged with murder, but his lawyers convinced the jury with actual video footage that the charges need to be dropped, as all Pizarro was doing was defending himself. The Rolling Stones members stated that they did not even realize a murder had taken place when they were performing at the concert. But in the Gimme Shelter documentary, Jagger notices the commotion in the crowd and threatens to end the performance until a hand from the stage pulls him aside and informs him about the gun. He even comments in an interview decades down the line that it is truly unfortunate for someone to be murdered at a concert when concerts are supposed to be places of joy and happiness. Years down the line, in 1985, Alan Pizarro mysteriously drowned to death in Anderson Lake. Police were baffled as they said the incident just didn't make sense, and he was soon buried in the famous Los Gatos Cemetery in San Jose, California. Number 8. Paul Ishide. Known as the intellectual member, he was a sharp stockbroker in the daytime and at night went back to being a Hells Angels member. But in 2001, Paul was convicted of being involved with the murder of Yvonne Garcia. Allegedly, Yvonne had disrespected the Angels members at a clubhouse party in Mesa, Arizona. But this murder will just bring the chills down your spine. After they murdered her, they put her in the trunk of a car and threw her body in a random spot in the middle of the scorching Arizona desert. In 2003, Paul was arrested for drug trafficking, racketeering, and even homicide as police were suspicious he was connected to Yvonne's kidnap and murder. But in a turn of events, the judge temporarily released him until his official trial date with the promise that he had to wear an electronic GPS on his ankle. Soon, Paul became greedy and decided to remove his ankle GPS. He feared that he might lose the case and would be forever behind bars if convicted. Now remember, Paul was not your ordinary low-IQ Hells Angels member. He supposedly had everything planned out and even attained a new passport, even changing his facial appearance in hopes of never being spotted by authorities. Years down the line in 2011, Paul was arrested for committing a small crime in Argentina. And that's when authorities were not only able to identify who he was, but they realized that Argentina was the country that he had fled to so many years ago. After 7 years of legal disputes, he was officially extradited back to the United States and is residing in a Maricopa County prison. Number 7. Mikhail Guinness. Mikhail was involved with the death of 5 members of the Hells Angels Canada group. The hit was strategically planned as the 5 fellow members had disobeyed orders, and when they were murdered, they were closed up in sleeping bags and thrown in the river, with heavy cinder blocks attached to them. That way, they would sink all the way down the river. When authorities became aware of the incident, it was published in every newspaper all over the country and was labeled as the Lennoxville Purge. Causing outrage within the residents of Lennoxville, it even got to the point where, because there was so much pressure on authorities to arrest the Angels members, many Hells Angels had a meeting to never exist in Quebec, Canada anymore. Mikhail was soon arrested and given a life sentence. But with a strong legal team, in 2010 he was granted parole. He even admitted to the judge that the murder of Roy was committed because he refused to consume hard narcotics, going against the Angels' rules, as well as his gang believed that Roy was informant secretly working for the authorities. Number 6. James Brandes. Known as the Enforcer, he was feared by many in the gang and was a high-ranking member of the Oakland Division, and was known to move heavy and large amounts of drugs all over the state of California. But in 1977, he has slipped up and authorities had caught him with almost a pound of drugs in his possession. But James was a rebel. When he was interviewed by Rolling Stones magazine, he stated that he was a top boss and he didn't take orders from no one, especially police and detectives. He feared none as the streets were his to own. But all of a sudden, in 1977, the unexpected happened when he tried to murder a San Jose Police Department sergeant, John Cracked. He carefully orchestrated an assassination attempt on his life by placing a bomb next to his police car. When authorities found out about this in 1979, they started a case against James for murder and racketeering, as the police department wanted to do everything in their power to crack down on the Hells Angels gang. James was also charged with the murder of Ray Dales, who was on schedule to testify against the Hells Angels in court in regards to the Redwood City murder trial. But despite all the pressure from the authorities, James was never convicted. But as they always say, karma will catch up to you by poisoning your conscience. And unfortunately, in 1994, James took his own life, committing suicide while he was in prison. Number 5. David Carroll, who went by the nickname Wolf, was a high-profile Canadian biker, part of the Hells Angels gang of Quebec. David was considered an elite and was well known on the streets. He was handpicked by Maurice Boucher to join the Hells Angels. And because of his sharpness and smarts on the streets, he was in charge of all the narcotic sales that went on in the streets. Soon, he started to gain a reputation of toughness and became the main hitman for the head boss Maurice Boucher, killing almost 15 people, all of which who crossed the line. Police said David was at the scene of the Lennoxville massacre of 1985, the same one in which 5 Hells Angels members were killed. They tried to charge him with first-degree capital murder, but the case was dropped in 1987 due to lack of evidence. But Carroll's life was interesting. Before he even joined the Hells Angels, he gained the reputation as a well-known pimp in Halifax. While he was running his prostitution ring, he was raking up thousands already, as he had set monetary disbursements required of 40% of all the prostitutes' earnings. At the same time, police charged him with running a prostitution scandal and sentenced him to 1 year in jail. In 1990, he moved to Quebec with his wife and was again sentenced short after. In 2001, David was charged with 13 counts of first-degree murder, connecting him to Operation Springtime. Fortunately for David, he was not in the United States, but rather hiding in Mexico. The US authorities tried to file to have David extradited, believing that he also had $1 million in his possession in a private bank in Antigua. Currently, it is rumored that he is somewhere in Brazil, although his whereabouts are still unknown, as police say they got a tip that he was spotted somewhere in Australia. Number 4. Mikhail Langlois, nicknamed Man of the Skies, was an avid pilot with a passion to fly the skies. He joined the motorcycle gang when he was 22, along with President Yves LeBoss and hitman Yves Trudeau. In 1985, he was another victim involved in the Lennoxville massacre, and due to fear of being convicted and put behind bars for the rest of his life, he fled the country for 2 years, but soon returned to turn himself in, being charged with only being an accessory to the fact of murder, and the judge only gave him a 2-year sentence. In 1998, he was again charged with narcotics trafficking and was forced to submit to a plea deal, leading to another 5 years behind bars. In 2015, federal prosecutors again charged him as part of Operation Shark, stating that he had taken part in a murder connected to the famous Quebec biker war. Number 3. Robert Mora. Known as the Titan, Robert Mora moved onto the scene when the Hells Angels had trouble taking over the streets of Arizona. Known to be a fierce enforcer and physical threat, Robert, and was even convicted of murder in 1980 when he was in his mid-20s. When he was serving time behind bars, Robert took on boxing and became a champion in prison. Remember now, Robert was a physical monster. At 6 feet 3 inches tall and almost 300 pounds, everyone feared him, as he was built like a rock with huge muscles. In 1984, when he helped the Hells Angels take over Arizona, he became a well-respected figure, as the Hells Angels added another state to their empire. In 1993, he was charged with the killing of a rival motorcycle gang member and sentenced to life in prison, with the judge giving him no parole. To this day, Robert is still talked about by fellow Hells Angels members and is seen as a loyal example and legend between the gang. He died in 2014 from medical issues related to diabetes. Number 2. Yves Trudeau. Born in February 4th, 1946 in Quebec, Canada. He is known as the Godfather and the most famous Hells Angels murderer of all time. But you would never think he had that reputation by just looking at him. He was only 135 pounds and with a height of 5 feet and 6 inches, the furthest thing from a motorcycle gangster. He started his career at Canadian Industries Limited as an explosive specialist and used his skills to pursue many future bombings for the gang. And the motorcycle gangs loved this. They saw his experience as something that was to be valued, making him quickly rise through the ranks. He later confessed to 43 murders in his time as part of the Hells Angels, with the use of 10 bombings and 43 guns, all taking place from 1973 to 1985. The St. Lawrence River soon became known by authorities as the dump yard because of all the bodies investigators would later find there. But Yves started to go down the wrong path, becoming a cocaine drug addict. Soon the Hells Angels found out about his addiction and they quickly ousted him from their gang. While in rehab, he became paranoid and the whole time believed that the Hells Angels were coming to murder him, causing him to turn himself in to the authorities and become an informant against the Angels. The government still gave him a life sentence behind bars, but with the possibility of future parole after 7 years due to his collaboration with the police. In 1994, his parole was granted to become a free man. The government even gave him an alias name with hopes of starting all over. In 2004, his troublemaker personality kicked in and he was again charged with sexually assaulting a boy. The judge gave him 4 years in jail. In 2008, Yves passed away of cancer. And lastly, Maurice Boucher. Maurice is Canadian and was the boss of Quebec's Hells Angels division. He's considered the force of power and a feared criminal. Born on June 21, 1953, Maurice was the typical juvenile delinquent, and all through his youth, he leaned towards violence and criminal acts to make it through life. At 15 years of age, he was already an addict and left school because of how intense his addiction had gotten. From 1975 to 1978, he was arrested by the police multiple times for armed robberies and frequent home invasions of the civilians of Quebec. In 1987, he became an official Hells Angel member. Maurice was a charismatic person and extremely popular with his fellow motorist gangsters. He wanted to make it known all throughout Quebec that he was a violent enforcer not to be messed with. Everyone feared Maurice because of his brutal and backstabbing behavior, as he acted like a deceiving snake. In 1985, he strategically planned to take over the narcotics trade in Quebec, as he had plans to kick out the smaller biker gangs in the region. But it backfired, as it led to a long and vicious war in the region between the biker gangs, leaving almost 163 people dead. When police investigated the situation and realized Maurice was the mastermind between the gang wars, Maurice hit back at them by trying to murder 2 police officers involved in the investigation. And that was the end of his days. In May of 2002, when he was taken to court, the judge ruled him guilty and gave him a life sentence to forever serve behind bars. And in 2022, his fate came to an end when he died of cancer. To this day, he is remembered as a heartless crime figure that brought nothing but sorrow and chaos to the streets of Canada. The Hells Angels are considered the most famous and brutal motorcycle gang in the world, mainly because of the 10 individuals mentioned. But it's crucial to keep in mind that not all members are part of the criminal activities going on. If you like this video and want to see more videos just like this, please subscribe.